Okay, so we want to receive our parameters as an object so that we can fish out the information from the body of the request without needing to specify the hints that we can do if we wanted to use just a string of username, string of password like this. But we'll take a different approach because I do like to take advantage of conventions in C# where they're available. And one of the things that we can use in our project that we will use is something often referred to as a DTO. A data transfer object. And this is something that we're typically used to transfer data between two different layers of our code, and it can help us to shape the data when we're returning data. But in our case, we just want an object where we can specify that we're expecting a username and password as a parameter. So inside Solution Explorer, inside the API folder, let's create a new folder and we'll call it DTOs. And inside the DTOs folder, let's create a new file that's going to be a class, and we'll just call it register DTO. And inside this class, then all we need to specify is the properties that we're expecting. So in this case, it's going to be a prop of a string of a username, and I've gone for lowercase name as the username here, as I'd like to send up this information as just username all in lowercase. And that's what I've specified inside the body of one of our Postman requests here. I want to specify it as user_n name. So inside the DTO, that's how I've specified it here. And because we need this property, we're going to also use the required attribute there as well. And we'll also specify a type of string for the password. And again, we're going to specify this as required, as we need them to supply the password. Now, there's a number of different ways nowadays, it seems, to specify that something is required. And this has been available since C#11. We're on C#12 now. But typically as well, when it comes to receiving information in an API request, we've also got the ability to use data annotations. And we can say that something is required as an attribute above the property that we're saying is required. Now, this does feel like duplication, and it is technically, because this is going to achieve the same thing as this. But we also have the ability to add other validators. For example, I could specify a max length of the username and say, I don't want any usernames to be longer than 100 characters in our database. So we'll use a combination of both really. We'll have the required because this is necessary for our compiler so that we don't need to give this an initial value. And we can also use data annotations as well for validation when we want something to be provided. So this will also be applied as a validator. And you can keep the max length there or take it away. I'm just going to take it away to be as brief as possible in the code here. And then in our account controller, we can use our new register DTO. So instead of the string of username and password here, we specify register DTO, and we'll call it register DTO. And then to use it, we just say register DTO.username and the register DTO.password here. Now, we also don't have any constraints inside our database to prevent us from creating duplicate usernames. And I would like to prevent that. I would like all of our usernames in our database to be unique. So we need to check with our database to see if we already have a user with the same username before we can proceed with creating a new user. And we'll do that inside a private method inside this class. So I'll specify private async task. That's going to return a type of Boolean, so we specify bool, and then say user exists. And we'll pass in the string of the username as a parameter here. And we'll return and say await and context.users, and we want to see if there's any user with the same username. So we're going to use any async. And then we'll say x as the parameter for the lambda expression, and say x.username is equal to the username that we're passing in here as a parameter. Now that will return true if the username matches. But what we'll also do Because C# is a case-sensitive language, then, for example, Bob with an uppercase B is not going to be equal to Bob. So we're going to ensure consistency of our usernames, and we're going to specify them to lowercase as well. And we're always going to compare against the lowercase value. And to do that, we can just specify .to lower. And we'll do the same with the username that we're passing in here as well. So we'll specify to lower there. Now we do get some ellipses here, and it does tell us that we should prefer using string equals with a string comparison to perform a case-insensitive comparison. But Entity Framework does not like this, and it does not work. And if we accepted this, and I'll just give an example of what it's suggesting that we use, then it's suggesting we use this instead. But this doesn't work. This will give us an exception. So I'm going to stick with converting this to lower on both sides so that we're comparing like for like, and if it does exist, then this is going to return true, and we can check for this in our code up here. And also in our register DTO.username, let's also ensure that we save it in our database as the lowercase variant of this username. And then before we start doing the password encryption, we're just going to add a conditional here. So we're going to say if await and then user exists, and we're going to pass in the register DTO.username here, and if that is true, then we can return a bad request, and we're going to say username is taken as the message that we're going to pass in the bad request. So let's check the status of our API, and once again it wants us to restart the app, so I'll say yes to that. And once it has restarted, we can go test. So let's go to Postman once again. Now we've got the register user option with username Bob, and I think I've already got Bob in my database, but we'll soon find out. So if I click send, then we'll see that username is taken. So, okay, so we'll have to pick a different username. So I'll say Dave with the password and click send, and this time we get success using the body approach because now we've got our register DTO and Dave is registered. If we try register user or register a user with a blank username and a blank password, then this will also fail because these fields are required. So now we've tested the register functionality, I'm just going to take a small detour just to show you how to set up and use the .NET debugger so that we can examine our code if something is not working as we are hoping it does. And we'll take a look at that next.